specialist here at the at the Department of Education. My apologies. Just left the classroom last year, so I'm happy to be in this new role with y'all and share about our SAT.
Okay. As you know from when you registered, you were given the option to ask questions. Then we had a lot of questions come in. A lot of these were questions we already had information about. We put together some slides that cover a lot of, I think, the biggest questions. So we're going to go through those really quickly. Honestly, this answers 90% of the questions that were covered. We are going to go quickly. We are going to go probably pretty quickly through it. Again, I'm going to remind everyone to please mute your line if you're not actively engaged in asking a question or something later on. But please be muted for right now until we get to the question portion, and then we'll begin taking some questions. And hopefully, again, pay attention because I think most of the questions will be answered throughout this presentation. So, okay. Attendance players. All right. So the first thing is we will be assessing math and ELA, and the essay will not be included. That was a question we were getting a lot early on, a lot less recently. I think it's big. This actually we've gotten the word out a fair amount about. There will be no essay portion. So the ELA test does consist of a writing test and a reading and the two parts of the test, the reading and language test and then the writing test, but there is no actual essay portion of the test. The math test consists of multiple choice questions and then I would say gridded response, but as we'll get to, the test is given digitally, so it'll probably be like it's like a key entry sort of response. The test is administered weekday at the school during the school day, so that there is no Saturday administration involved in this. It's during the school day. All the testing is done in one day. The exception is for cases where a student has an accommodation that requires longer testing windows. Then you have an extended period to take account of all the kids who have accommodations and might need a longer period of time to be tested. And it will be administered digitally. Again, the exception to that would be students who have an accommodation that means they need a paper and pencil test can get those accommodations. The testing dates will be March 2nd through 4th of 2022. So I said it's a one-day test, and then I just told you 3 days. What does that mean? It means schools will get to pick how they administer within those 3 days, but when a student starts testing on a day, they will finish testing that day. So you can either say, okay, everybody on March 3rd, all of the juniors take the test, or you can say, okay, a third of them take it on the 2nd, a third of them take it on the 3rd, and a third of them take it on the 4th. However you want to split it up across those days. Give it all on the 2nd, and then any kids who are sick on the 2nd take it again on the 4th to make up. Whatever within those 3 days, however you have to do it. Based on your situation, you have some flexibility around there. There are also makeup testing dates, April 13th through 20th. The exception is Monday, April 18th is not allowed. So there's 5 days in there. Again, our goal is for schools to test on that March date, on one of those March dates, and then come April, we would only be assessing people who either missed those dates or maybe something went wrong. They didn't get their accommodation, so their test was invalidated or something like that. And some internet went out, some random thing happened. There is that makeup window. If you wait until, if for some reason you don't test in March and you wait until the April window, then that's the last chance to take it. And so if something were to happen that would prevent testing in the April window, then there's no contingency past April 20th to give students the test. I want to briefly go through the high school testing and make kind of some key notes here. So if you'll notice, the SAT here is required for juniors, and that's because it's the accountability assessment. The I-STEP Plus is still around for seniors who need it for the GQE waiver. So there will be some seniors who still need it. No juniors or anyone moving forward other than current seniors who are in cohort 2022 should be taking the I-STEP Plus in high school for any reason, or should be taking the I-STEP Plus at all. It's not part of their graduation requirements anymore. it is only usable for students who are seniors and not on pathways. Those are the only students who need to be taking the iStep Plus this year. The SAT will be given again to all juniors. It can be used for that pathway 3 post-secondary ready competency. It can be used for that if the student meets that benchmark. It's not, however, a graduation requirement in the way the iStep Plus was. It is not required. It's so a student does not have to pass the SAT to graduate. If they do not meet the cut scores, sorry, the benchmark for the graduation pathway when they take the SAT, they have all the other pathway 3 options to choose from. They have the ASVAB, they have the honors diploma, that, you know, all of those other options that exist for graduation pathways are available. They will not and are not expected to take the SAT until they pass it. It is not a it is a graduation requirement because it's one of many among the pathway, but it is not a retake it until you pass it sort of requirement the way the iStep Plus was in the past. So it is not a graduation qualifying exam, in other words. Because it's not a graduation qualifying exam, starting in with the cohort 2023, again, there's no retests offered. So again, aside from the fact that we have a makeup window for students who miss the March window for some reason, there's not a retest opportunity. Students who don't pass it as a junior don't take it again as a senior. In fact, it's not covered for seniors. It does start with cohort 2023, so I will say that a lot of times throughout this I will mention, you know, all juniors will take it. The one kind of little asterisk I would put there is by juniors I mean cohort 2023. So if you have someone in cohort 2023 who in your school is classified as a senior because they have a lot of credits and they're planning to graduate this year, that student still has to take this because they're a cohort 2023 student. Similarly, if you had a grade 10 student who's behind on credits and you know, isn't classified as a junior, they are cohort 2023, they need to take it. So whenever the registration file is done, it will be cohort 2023. So throughout this, as I say juniors, just recognize that I'm saying that interchangeably with cohort 2023. So the students who, you know, were on the path to graduate a year from, or not a year from now, but in spring of 2023, is who I'm talking about when I say juniors in this. So those are the students who are required to take it. They are also required to take it even if they have already taken the SAT and have gotten a result. They have to, the spring administration that they have to take for accountability is the administration that counts for accountability. So you can't swap in a previous score. If they miss it, they can't take it over the summer and use that score for accountability. It's the spring score. So so that's just something to keep in mind. Okay, so in talking about access in the SAT, we have some things we want to really highlight because we really think it's a benefit to students. So first of all is scheduling. This is a school day administration. One barrier to access could be for students that they you know, they have obligations on the weekend. They have family obligations, they have work obligations, and taking a Saturday to take a test can be a barrier. So that is eliminated. They're already in school. Now they'll be taking a college entrance exam in school during the school day whenever they didn't, you know, what else they had to do was be in school and do something else. So the testing is part of what they would normally is in the time frame that they already have set aside for school activities. It is paid for by the state. Cost can also be a serious hurdle for certain socioeconomic groups. And so, you know, they don't have to get into a debate with family members about is the cost worth it, or, you know, am I really on a path to college, or debate if they want to take the SAT, they will be able to take the SAT. Preparation. In the past, there are a lot of courses that you know, will charge a lot with claims to prepare you for the SAT. Currently, there is a free personalized official SAT practice through Khan Academy. It's fully supported by College Board, and so that is available as well. And we'll do a little bit more on that later. but that is available. If the students have taken the PSAT previously, they use their College Board account and they link it to their Khan Academy account, and it actually feeds information that informs what areas they need to kind of focus on to get the most efficient practice for the SAT to have the biggest impact on their score. And then finally, these scores will be reportable scores for colleges. They will be, you can provide them to up to 4 colleges as part of what the state is paying for. So that is that's an official report. I know a lot of colleges now are going to where when you apply, you kind of tell them what your score is, and you don't have to officially report it until you get accepted, basically. And so those would be 4 official reports. Obviously, you can tell people what your score is however much you want to. And then there are scholarship opportunities. So for people who are on track to college, there are those benefits as well. In addition to those access things, we really, we know there are a lot of questions that we got that were related to preparation for the SAT. And one thing we want to be mindful of is to recommend to everyone that they be very data driven when they look at preparation. You have a lot of data at your disposal from other tests, including the PSAT and other formative assessments that are out there. We have provided this document that we put out a couple of months ago with some tips for being data-driven as you prepare for the SAT. When you get the link to this should be a link on that PDF that will take you to this document. If you run into any problems, my contact information is at the end of the presentation, and you can follow up with me and I can send you the link, but the slides should give you the link to this. Or since you have the slide, it's also copied here. Now I'm going to hand it over to MacKenzie, because I know in addition to all of this, in terms of preparation, she has some things to share about the Indiana academic standards.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. So before I kind of dig deep here, I wanted to answer some questions we got early on. One of the questions was, are quadratics tested on this exam, because they're not mentioned in the standards? And so when creating this document, the IDOE looked at the blueprint for the SAT and matched the standards that were most frequently represented. So we're not saying that quadratics will not be tested, but when creating this document, we picked the standards that we saw the most frequently and had the most questions about them. So we still encourage the standards to be taught to the breadth and depth they were intended for, but these standards here are just highlighting some of the key ones on the test that we really think should be focused on for the exam. So these are your Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and Geometry standards. I also want to make a point here that A2, SE2, when we just did our standards revision in December of 2020, that name got changed to SEI2. That hasn't been reflected on the math framework yet. And so we're still working on a website migration. And so that name will be changed eventually, but the standard itself did not change. So whether you have the standards printed out where it says A2, SEI2, or on the framework where it says A2, SE2, it is the same standard. And I will continue to work on making sure that those names are the same across all presented data from the IDOE. So, all right, thanks, Andrew. We can go to the next slide if you'd like. Okay, and then I also had some questions about why were there standards that were not part of the 3 core classes that most of our kids take. And so I wanted to show standards that in case there was a 4th-year student who was accelerated, or perhaps you wanted just to know for vertical articulation purposes where the standards are going. There is a trig standard, but it's about sine, cosine, and tangent, which is taught in geometry. And then you have several probability and statistics standards, but as we all know as educators, probability and statistics is kind of built within Algebra 1 and the data science standards. So while these are typically classes that are not part of our core, we do ask that you use vertical articulation and work as a department to see if you can't get some of these foundational skills built into your classrooms. And then our last math slide talks about quantitative reasoning. And again, it's not a core class, but quantitative reasoning skills are really those skills about analyzing data and bringing things to the real world. And so I think as educators, that it's our job to take the standards and bring them to life and apply them in a way that's meaningful for our students. And so again, if you just read these standards, I am absolutely positively sure that you can find ways to map them in your Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and geometry classes. But again, I'm going to repeat that there are students who might be taking this class as juniors, and I want to show the full breadth and depth of the standards as a whole. And then we do have some ELA standards here as well. As Andrew mentioned, I'm secondary math specialist, so I cannot speak to many of these standards, but they were picked the same way that the math standards were picked. That again, the standards that we saw represented more than once on the blueprint. We saw them coming up again and again on the test document. And so if you have questions, you can shoot Andrew or I an email, and we'll make sure that we get those questions answered by the appropriate people.
Yeah, we'll just jump through those. Again, what I think we want to just really reiterate and can't reiterate enough is that our opinion and the stance of the department really is the best way to prepare your students is teach them the depth and breadth of the Indiana academic standards using robust teaching strategies and rigorous instruction. And then the goal of the SAT is to assess that. And so the only thing actually I would say about a quote unquote test prep thing to prep the kids for the SAT is just to let them know that SAT no longer does penalties for incorrect answers. So that, you know, I think that stopped a few years ago. So if you have a guess, it will not penalize you. It just won't give you a correct answer. And I think that's the only real test strategy I think that might be useful to know when you're in the SAT, because back when I took it, guessing was frowned upon because it could hurt you. So, okay. So again, for students going into practice, in addition to all the Khan Academy that we were talking about, just for a student to see. Just for a student to see what they have, what the interface looks like to just kind of get in some practice, they can go to this website and use this digital test preview option, and that will let them, that basically logs them in. So that's similar to the released items repository for our iLearn test and for the iStep test previously, where students can actually go in and see what the system is and play with the tools and everything. This link here, get free world class practice, that takes you to the Khan Academy official practice that I told you about. Teachers can go in there and set them, or parents, and set themselves up as coaches and you know, have students listed under them, and they would see, you know, what areas the student needs work on and maybe get some ideas of some ways to incorporate some practice or some things into the coursework that way. So there are a lot of tools there, again, that are available to you to the degree you wish to use them. To the degree if students are, I just got a call from someone who said their students are asking, how can I do well on the test? You know, I would direct them to these things that either, you know, they can either be done by the student kind of on their own to get familiarity with it, or they can be done in more of a kind of guided mentorship sort of way as well. So, you know, it really can be tailored to the specific situation and resources you have available. Okay, we got a lot of questions about cut scores. So this is my attempt to create a bit of a flow chart about how this works. So the way the cut scores will be set is they will be set in the spring. And so the students take the test, they are assessed, and we get student performance data. The teacher, a group of teachers, administrators, and educators are all brought together to take part in what's called a standard setting meeting. And they review actual student data. Not to get too into the weeds on it, basically they go through items from easiest to hardest based on actual Indiana performance. So the first item they will see in their sequence of items is the item that the most Indiana students got correct when they took the test in the spring. And so that's the easiest item. And so they will go through until they reach the point. Well, first they'll review everything, then they'll have discussions about what students should know and everything. Then individually, those teachers will go through and determine, here's the point where I think if a student has been able to answer the questions up until this point, I feel that they have they are what I would classify as proficient. And you get a range that way, and so we take their results, and then it's brought back to them. We show them what the mean of their options were, what the range were, and then they get into a discussion about why they chose that. And some people will really feel like, if question 15, if they can't answer question 15, they can't be proficient. Some people won't feel that way. It's this discussion back and forth among content experts about what content really needs to be mastered or understood even in order to be considered proficient. And so that's all done using actual Indiana student data, which is why it can't take place until the spring after the students have all completed the testing. They use that process. They go through multiple rounds. They have a lot of discussions. They look at more and more student data as they go, and then they recommend state cut scores. This is the process that was used for iStep in the past. It's been used for iLearn. It's used in a slightly modified version for IAM. So that's how the cut scores are established. Those cut scores are recommended. They go to the State Board of Education for approval, and assuming they are approved, they then go on, and those cut scores determine the proficiency levels on the assessment. Then those proficiency levels are applied to determine proficiency rates and everything, and then that all goes on to the Office of Student Accountability. Unfortunately, there's no one from the Office of Student Accountability on this call, and I know there are a lot of questions about accountability. I saw the list of questions. We don't know exactly what that will look like. I did have a conversation with accountability earlier, and so it's looking like moving forward, the current plan for accountability doesn't include much in the way of growth metrics, but we don't know how that's all going to play out. Right now, there have been no changes to the accountability rules, but since there isn't going to be growth, obviously, we aren't going to look at iStep to SAT because they're different assessments. So there's not going to be any growth in that year because they're completely different assessments. So it would be appropriate to look at the SAT as establishing a whole new baseline for what your pass rate is, not to try and compare it to iStep because it will be completely different assessment. There's no process for like correlating the two cut scores or anything like that. They're on different scales. There's just no way to do that. So again, I'm sure there will be more information coming out. As of right now, though, the law surrounding like the accountability rules and everything is what it is. The one thing we do know is we would not expect in the future there to be any held blameless holdings, or anything by the federal government or the state government. So the expectation is those probably will not happen again. So that's something that we definitely want to be clear on. Again, so just keep in mind, the iStep Plus was given in to all students in grade 10. It was a GQE. It says grade 10 standards. The SAT is a college readiness test primarily. It's given in grade 11. It assesses a different set of standards. They're on different scales. Comparing them would really just not be appropriate because they're so different. Accommodations. I have done entire webinars on accommodations. We have an entire afternoon session planned to be given by College Board in late October and early November throughout the state. We'll get into that a little bit later. Those that will focus on accommodations. Right now, we will just say accommodations do not automatically import from IIEP or from any other system. You need to submit all accommodations requests at least 2 months prior to the administration into the SSD online system. And then designate at least one SSD coordinator at your school. Again, there will be a lot more information about accommodations coming. I know that's probably about half the questions I get is about accommodations. We do have a video out on it and some other documentation, which I have linked later. So just we'll get to that in a little bit. But in this presentation, we aren't going in depth and listing out, every single accommodation that's available or anything like that. Coming up, we do have workshops by the College Board. Again, you do have access to these slides through the link, but I will linger here so you can jot down the date that's nearest to you. You know, there will be invitations coming soon that will have more specific information on where these are and times. These are all morning presentations, but I want to get this on your radar if you need to, you know, begin planning now to schedule a substitute to attend these. If you're a person who would want to make the trek for these are in-person presentations. The recording will be available after October 8th, is whenever the webinar is getting recorded. And again, the goal is this will be College Board there. These are SAT suite overviews. So the emphasis of these presentations is really on what is in the SAT. So it's a lot more on what sort of content would you expect to be in there? How can you utilize data, you know, between the different elements of the SAT suite? So from PSAT, tips like there's no longer a penalty for guessing, you know, are things that are presented in this webinar or this workshop. So it is highly recommended. And also, you know, you can ask questions of the College Board people there, anticipating, you know, things that maybe won't be specifically covered in this, but that they are willing to answer questions about. So again, just keep in mind, if you can make it to any of these, great. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, you'd rather wait for the webinar that will come out. Or I don't know if it'll come out on October 8th. It will be broadcast on October 8th and recorded and put out sometime after that. Then starting in late October into November, we will have another series of of presentations and workshops, and then ultimately a webinar that focus on the SAT implementation. And that is more intended of like, you know, what does the digital SAT look like? How do we interact with it? You know, what do I have to do as a CTC or an STC to get my students, you know, in the system correctly and everything? And all of that stuff is in that second set of webinars. And then that's in the morning on those. And then the afternoon will be focused on accommodations. So again, that will be almost a full day webinar workshop that I would recommend people look for, and whenever we release the dates on those, we just don't have the final dates on those yet. And then there will also be another series in January that where College Board will give specific training on just for TAs how to administer the test. This slide is in here basically just so you have the list of links to various flyers and slides and webinars that we've given and videos and things like that. Excuse me. Okay, we have contact for the College Board. They have a direct email address, indianatesting@collegeboard.org. Honestly, if you have a question about College Board's system, it really makes sense to just reach out to them with it. You certainly can reach out to me, but really, if it's about College Board system, they are the ones who can answer you best. By all means, copy me on it so I can see their response and know what their answer is. But a decent chunk of the time, especially if it's like an in the weeds question that maybe I haven't encountered yet, I'm going to forward the question to someone at College Board or ask you to email College Board. So if you just want to go directly to College Board, again, if it's a policy question, by all means, reach out to me. And again, here's the contact information for the Office of Student Assessment, my email address, the high school assessment phone line, which I get those voicemails pretty quickly and think I have a pretty good rate at getting back to people. So, okay, and so that's the end of the slides. So do we have, I assume we have some questions that maybe did not get answered. So let me pull up the chat here. And is there any of the people who are, I was running the PowerPoint, so I don't know if anybody has one. MacKenzie, if you saw one that maybe stuck out to you that I should jump to immediately, or are we?
Yeah, I can pull a couple. So someone recently just asked, what sort of training will test administrators need? And are there training signups already available for people to sign up for those?
No, those trainings have not been put out yet. So
Okay.
we just put out, you are maybe the second group of people that saw the actual dates for this first set of workshops. The later ones will be coming, in the weeks to come. They will be sent out at least to CTCs through the listserv. I'm sure they'll be sent out to the STCs and the CTCs directly by College Board as well. So we'll do everything we can to get this information out, as broadly as we can. So, okay.
I had a question earlier about how does the group of teachers, administrators, educators get selected for the review?
Yeah, well, so first of all, if you want to volunteer, we are currently actively looking for volunteers. If you're a CTC, you may have noticed in the newsletters this week that went out from the Office of Student Assessment, there was a notice that said, we're looking for educators to take part in group workshops and committee work and things like that. So, by all means, there's a link there where you can provide your information, forward that on to anyone who's interested. I know Lynn's on. She may have the link. Let me stop sharing so I can dig around and see if I can find it and share it in the chat window. But yeah, I can get that link for everybody. So that is an excellent question. The newsletter I'm talking about actually goes directly to CTCs, so it's not one you can subscribe to. I think it may also have been in Dr. Jenner's newsletter on Friday, but I'm not certain about that. I don't remember for sure if I saw it or not.
Oh, sorry, Lauren. I just posted the newsletter link in the chat. I must have people asking for Dr. Jenner's newsletter link, so I put that in the chat as well.
But yeah, we'll get that information out, and it does come out in Dr. Jenner's newsletter as well whenever we put requests like that out. So we compile a list, and then we look through and we attempt to get a broad diversity of educators to represent those things. Obviously, in something like this, an important thing is the content knowledge, but we also try. We want rural teachers, we want urban teachers, we want different socioeconomic areas, kind of a full range if we can get it. So yeah, I found the link. So let me pull it up here. Okay, so yeah, there's the link to apply for educator committees. And again, put your information in. We do many committees throughout the year. So once you've raised your hand once, you're really kind of not committed for life, but we definitely will follow up with you at some point to see if you want to volunteer for something. So we're happy to have more people. Okay, let's see.
I thought a good question you had, Andrew, was what should schools do if a student misses both testing windows?
Yeah, so if they miss both testing windows that are, again, they're a month apart. So if they miss both windows, then that student would not test. Now, as far as accountability, you have to test 95% of your students. As long as you meet 95%, it gets rounded up to a 100% participation. So that presumably wouldn't happen with many students, and we would hope they would still meet you'd still meet the 95% participation threshold. The other thing to keep in mind, because I get this question a lot, is what about a student who moves in after the window or something? And another thing to keep in mind is that for a student to count as an accountable student in the calculation for your school, they have to be enrolled in your school for 162 days of the school year. So if a student moves into your school on March 3rd, they aren't going to count toward the accountability calculation of your school. Now, by all means, test that kid come April. Like, there's no reason not to, but you don't have to for accountability purposes. That kid will not figure into the accountability calculation either way because they just weren't in your school long enough. So that is that's kind of the opposite end. So again, if it's a kid, in this case, if a kid misses, just the portion, just kind of those days. Schools who are not in school for 165 days count for participation rate, don't they? I'm not exactly sure. So they have to be enrolled for 162 days. Are you talking about like if they're absent for that many days? Like if they're absent for 165 days?
No, you had just said they don't count for accountability if they're not enrolled 162 days, but I believe they still count towards your participation goal of 95%. Is that correct?
My understanding from accountability is they do not. In my previous discussions is that they do not fall, they don't count as the denominator or the numerator, they don't count toward either the numerator or denominator in that calculation. If you meet the 95% goal in March, do we need to administer the test in April? If you have students who did not test in April, or in March, you should test those students in April, because otherwise you're depriving them of the chance to take the test. Now, if they don't want to take the test, and I mean, the goal is to get that percent as high as you can. If you meet the 95% in March and you have a handful of kids, the issue would be if any student wants the SAT and wants it paid for by the state and is not offered it in April, I think they would have a reason to complain, and so I would recommend offering it in April since it's covered. Now again, if at that point you want to make it optional for students, that is potentially that's basically up to the school as to what they want to do. But if there was a student who missed it and wants to take it, I'd just be very hesitant to tell them they couldn't take it in April because it's provided by the state. Are you allowed to have multiple testing sessions in the same day? Are there time lengths as long as how long it will take to complete testing? There definitely are. I have not yet memorized those, Joyce. So yeah, if you have a couple of testing sessions in different rooms, I believe that's completely acceptable. I can double check on that with College Board. I can't think of any reason why it wouldn't be. The total testing time, Lynn just answered, is about 3.5 hours. And then obviously you'd have breaks in the day, and lunch and things like that. So.
A question that was asked was, when will the accommodations training be?
Yeah, again, the in-person accommodations trainings will be late October and early November. They will be afternoon trainings, and then again, there will be a webinar recorded for that. So that will go out, after that. So in November, it'll be available to everybody, and obviously earlier if you can make it to one of the trainings.
And what sort of training will test administrators need?
There will be an implementation training at that same time. So the way it'll work is the morning session will be implementation training. The afternoon session will be accommodations training on those days. And then there will be a training in January as well, for specifically about like just the nuts and bolts of administering the test. The implementation training is more intended for STCs about, how to like configure your school and all of that stuff, and get all the prep work done and be sure everything's done well in advance. the TA training is more for like the individual person who will be giving the test, and that again, that training will come in January. They also there are also trainings on College Board's website and things like that that would be very useful as well. Different handouts and things like that. There's an accommodations and supports handbook, all that sort of material that's available that's useful to go through. I did see a question. Let me see if I can find it now because okay, so you said the assessment will be administered through TIDE, but we have to submit all accommodations through College Board. So yeah, let me talk through that part of the procedure a little bit more. So the accommodation gets set by the case conference committee in IEP, or they create a 504 plan, or you know, whatever the plan that governs the accommodations are. So then you submit it in SSD online, and SSD stands for Services for Students with Disabilities. And so that is so that College Board can review and approve it. Now, the explanation that we have is that College Board will ask two questions during this process. They will ask you, is it in the student's plan? And are they regularly receiving this accommodation when they're assessed in the classroom? If your answer to both of those is yes, then if it's an accommodation that like that's in our accommodation document, it should be approved. If you answer no to one of those, so for example, you say this student needs a human reader, it's in his plan, but then you say, but you know what, we really don't give it to him normally when we're testing, then College Board will have questions. And they may reach out for you for documentation. Or vice versa, if you say we do this for them all the time, but it's not in their plan, then a lot of people will have questions probably. So if it's in the plan, it should be a fairly streamlined. There are some cases where College Board may ask questions even if you say it's in their plan, and they use it all the time, just because. And the reason for that is this is so College Board can do their due diligence to approve the score to be given out as a college reportable score. Because what you do not want is a student to take the test, to do well on the test, and then not be able to use it for colleges because all the steps were not taken to get it approved. That would be very, very bad for the student, and probably bad for some other people. So you want to go through all the steps so that it is approved that the student's accommodations will result in a released score, a college reportable score. So that's why we have to take them and submit them through SSD Online. Then once everything's approved in SSD Online, if the student requires a paper test, you would then order the paper tests. It's not an automated process. It requires actually ordering the paper tests or the Braille test or whatever. If the test is being administered digitally, you would go into the digital system, into TIDE, and would have to set their accommodations. We're looking into options to streamline this the way it's streamlined for iLearn and things potentially in the future, but there's not an end-to-end system solution at this point that we can use to just make it where the IEP feeds directly in and the student gets what they want, you know, what they need to have. So that is why there's those multiple steps. It's because College Board systems just don't talk to each other. And the reason you have to get College Board approval is ultimately so that score will be college reportable when it comes out. The one exception is we do have a state allowed accommodation, which is if a student needs the reading and writing content signed to them. If you do that, you can get a state allowed accommodation, but that will not result in a college reportable score. And again, the reason for that's fairly obvious, because if you're taking a reading test and you need the content signed to you, it's sort of a, you know, they just can't sign off that you have demonstrated reading at a level that they can report to the college. And so that is the thing we allow in Indiana as an accommodation, but is not allowed by College Board. So we just have kind of identified that up front as something that if they get that accommodation, you really want to be sure the students know that they would not get a college reportable score. let's see, I think Lynn said yes, but yeah, if once it's in the system, it remains in there actually for a year past their graduation date. So if you have already submitted accommodations and no accommodations have changed and they're approved, they're good for the SAT. So if a student took the PSAT, their accommodations would be in place. Now, obviously the PSAT, NMSQT is a paper test. The SAT is digital. So one thing to keep in mind is those accommodations might look different. On the PSAT, they might get a human reader. They were approved for a human reader. On the SAT, even though they're approved for a human reader, and you don't need to get approval again, they would get the digital alternative, which would be a text-to-speech accommodation in TIDE. So again, you know the College Board accommodations document talks about what these digital alternatives are. So, you know, since we're giving a digital test to most of the students, you know, that's what would happen there. If students just ignore the test and does nothing during the testing while it is being administered, will that be recorded on the test irregularity report, and will that score still be counted for accountability? If they did absolutely nothing, I mean, that would somehow be reflected at the tail end. I would have to check with the accountability office if that would be counted as a non-participation or as they participated because they put their name, you know, they typed their name in, they logged into the test, but they didn't do anything. I don't know how that will be evaluated by accountability yet. So we'll have to look into that.
Andrew, here was a question that was asked a bit ago, so
Yeah.
I don't want to lose it. It says, when I go to the website that you provided for practice tests for students, it requires registration codes. Where do we find those?
Okay. Practice tests for students requires registration codes. This was a link. Where do you get? I'm sorry, I'm not finding the question. So.
Oh, the question was way back.
Yeah. So can you repeat the question?
Oh yeah, and
I think it's the College Board website.
Yeah. Yes. There's the
yeah.
link you gave. And what the person was saying is when they tried to go there, they had to have registration codes.
For the student digital test preview?
I don't know what they were clicking on.
Let me share my screen because I'm just.
And this question was asked back while you were going through the presentation. So maybe the person who asked, if you could jump back in and clarify.
Yeah, so okay, so let me close this. Okay, so I'm here on this. So I click on go to student digital test preview. And it gets this. This is literally what you see if you log into our released items repository. You click sign in. You pick a grade level. So you pick grade 11. And you start the student digital test preview. And then if you wanted to use some accommodations, you could. You start, and here it looks like it's loading up questions. So now obviously if you want to get your scores, you need, I'm sure you need a code to get your scores. So maybe that was the link the person followed. I don't know. Yeah, so then there's like a login and get the free practice. Again, there's Khan Academy. Again, so the way the Khan Academy official practice works, we actually have a video coming out on this soon. The way it works is the student would log in and they would need their information about their previous score. So if they have any previous PSAT login information, they would need that. And they connect their Khan Academy to their College Board account. And it feeds the data about their performance on the SAT to Khan Academy, which informs an analysis of this is the content you need to work on based on your previous test scores. So, and again, teachers can log in and do like a coaching environment with several students under them. And again, we go a little bit into that, and the bulk of if you want to go into detail on that, go to the College Board website. They have information about like how teachers can utilize that for prep purposes and things like that in a lot of detail. Go to it's satpractice.org. We'll take you to the Khan Academy site that focuses on it. But yeah, but you can definitely get into that digital preview without any sort of code being required.
Awesome. Here was another interesting question. On College Board's site, it indicates that devices must be school-owned. Will exceptions be made for schools with all student-owned devices?
I suspect I know who asked this question. And yes, we are having conversations with College Board about that. Most schools are they're going to be school-owned devices. There are some schools that don't have school-owned devices where the kids own their own device. And College Board will be putting out some guidance about that soon. But we can't handle it. It just they have to think through the security implications on their end and kind of how best to handle it. But definitely, you know, those schools will be able to test with those devices is what I'm hearing now. It's just a matter of working out the logistics and getting that information out to you so it can all be taken care of.
Thank you. We have about 8 more minutes. I think that got most of the questions that were flying while you were presenting. I'm not going to guarantee I caught all of them, but I tried to copy and paste them as they were flying by. So I guess we can allow people to unmute their mics and ask questions, or however you want to handle this, Andrew.
Let's try that. Let's live dangerously. We have 8
All
minutes.
right.
We can shut it down early if it gets too chaotic, I guess. Yeah, if anybody wants to unmute to ask a question, or, you know, we'll still take them in chat. I know there are more questions, although we did, like I said, we did do a good job of I think getting most of the ones that were given to us ahead of time in the presentation. So they will not have to download the Tide portal. They would have to download the secure browser. So the question is on student-owned devices. So yeah, you would have to download the secure browser onto those student devices. I don't think you would have to download anything else, only the secure browser, I think. And Tide's a website, so you wouldn't have to download anything for Tide anyway. But yeah, the student never has to log into Tide. They log into the secure browser.
I've heard that it's possible that the requirements that we usually live by from the DOE in terms of licensed teachers administering tests versus what College Board has in the past allowed for SAT administration might be different. Do you have any thoughts on what that might look like in our buildings?
I believe College Board does not have that requirement. I don't know that we've actually had the internal conversations to decide for sure if we want to if we like we haven't publicly stated anything other than that our guidance says that the test administrators need to be licensed. So we don't have an exception in that guidance for the SAT. So we'll monitor just as we have and everything. So essentially you're kind of stuck in this case with the stricter of the two guidances, I guess. If there's something College Board won't allow, but we would allow, then you can't do it because College Board doesn't allow it. And if there's something that College Board would allow, but we don't allow it, then you can't do it because we don't allow it. So you can, there is a test administration considerations form that we used last year. If there's a situation where your circumstance is such that you really need someone who isn't licensed to give it, to administer the test, we do allow exceptions. You just have to request them in advance using that. I would have to double check on whether emergency licenses count. I think they do, but I'm putting a question mark after that, so don't hold me to that. I can double check on that. Lynn may be able to weigh in on whether emergency licenses count. I would have to look that up in our policy manual. Okay, any contingency plans for internet issues happening while taking the SAT assessment? So again, our contingency plan is April. So we recommend giving the test in March. And then if something goes wrong, give it in April. We would hope that if there's some sort of internet issue hitting in March, it has been resolved by April. If an internet issue takes you out in March and April, then you would want to have that very well documented in case accountability comes back and says, why did you not test? You would then have documented, well, but we submitted these reports, test irregularity reports, and the issue is, the whole school, the whole city shut down, or whatever, and that would be how you do it. But we would hope it wouldn't happen both times. So obviously that's one of the reasons we want everybody to try to test in that first window. I know some people have suggested, well, can we just wait until April? We really would not advise that. We have learned the last couple of years how things can happen. We've had global pandemic, we've had internet outages across half the state, we've had snowstorms across half the state in late February, which isn't insane, but it feels a little weird because it's literally both the iStep windows last year were hit by severe snowstorms over much of the state. You're just dealing with a lot of potential things that could postpone your window. So yeah, definitely we'd say try and give it in March, so that hopefully you have the backup plan if something goes wrong. Will there be different forms of test? Yeah, they have different forms of the test. As I understand it, basically every day the test is given, it's a different form. From day to day, it differs to some degree.
We've gotten the question twice, so I feel like I have to ask you, what happens if the whole school is closed down because of COVID? And then the second person that asked, what if we're virtual during both testing windows?
Document it.
Okay.
If we are still having, whole schools and districts going on lockdown in March and April, then I mean, the safety of your students, regardless of what is, the safety of your students has to take priority. If it's something in advance, reach out to us. We'll see if there's something that could do. But if you're under quarantine, it's not like there's any alternative to get people together at a library or something. Just communicate with us if that happens. I'm sure we'll know about it ahead of time. If it's at large scale, it could be like a small school, potentially. Something could be done. We'd reach out to College Board and see if there were any alternative. But just document it, and then when accountability comes asking questions, you would have the document to say the county told us we couldn't have school, and that.
Here's a great question that I would have to ask as a former middle school teacher: is practice test required for each student?
I do not believe it's required. No, I don't think there's any practice requirement for the SAT. It is highly recommended that the students not first engage with the system on the day of testing, but it is not an explicit requirement, I don't believe, from College Board.
All right.
This is Scott from Brownsburg Schools. Can I ask a quick question?
Yes, you have 1 minute. Go.
The previous memo indicated that we're going to go through the state's formal cut score setting process, but there's a law apparently that says our cut score can't be any lower than College Board's. Why would we go through a process that can only make this harder?
So the cut score process has to be gone through for peer review purposes. It's the standard of how cut scores are determined. It's not best practice for someone to just look at the test and say, I think the score needs to be this, and then just determine what the score is. So we have to go through that formal cut score process. You are correct that there's wording in the legislation that the score cannot be lower than the national proficiency cut score. And obviously that will inform what recommendations can be taken forward, because we cannot put forward a recommendation that is in violation of Indiana code, and other people can't approve it, and so Illinois, I know, has a cut score that is actually higher than the national benchmark, which I assume they arrived at through this process or one incredibly similar to it. And their perspective is, their Illinois standards are more rigorous than the national benchmark for the SAT, basically. And so that is a possibility that it would happen. But we just have to let the process go through the process and the teachers review the content. And I would think that would only happen if they looked at the content and they genuinely determined that would be where it would be needed to show a student is proficient on Indiana standards, would be to have a higher score. So that would be how that would fall out in the process. We can't, though, just not do the process. The question has been asked, and no, we will still be doing a cut score process, but again, with the caveat that we know there is a legislated minimum that we can go on our recommendation.
All right. Well, will Desmos be embedded? It seems like that's
Yes.
a quick yes or no.
Yep.
Okay. Yes. All right.
Students can use a handheld calculator though as well. That is an option, and I believe it's a universal feature, so it doesn't even need an accommodation. If a student is more comfortable with their handheld calculator, I doubt they can use their phone, but if they have an actual calculator, I think they can use it.
Got it. All right. Well, Andrew and MacKenzie, thank you so much. We here at Keep Indiana Learning are thrilled to have hosted you. For those of you still online, we have put a link in the chat to complete a short survey and receive a PGP certificate for your time. Lena, you have anything you want to add?
No, thank you guys so much. What a wonderful treat to have you here with us.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, guys.